summer holidays. It's August 2024, the sun is shining, but for how much longer for UK landlords? Let's get into it. So guys, as soon as Parliament is back, the new Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycook, has, now pronounce that carefully, don't want to mispronounce that, has some changes in store which are going to spook a lot of UK property investors and landlords, with even more probably going to leave the market. What does it mean for us? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you 6 problems and 6 opportunities where we can turn those problems into competitive advantage opportunities to increase our wealth. Let's get it. So, just going through quickly, what are the problems? Enter no-fault evictions. They were already on the cards for the Conservative government, didn't pass the Renters Reform Bill. We now expect a beefed up Renters Reform Act to pass through swiftly with enter no-fault evictions, which basically means you can't evict tenants because you feel like it, or indirectly because they won't pay the increased rent, so you just evict them. Not going to happen anymore, guys. Hardship tests. So now, even if this is rumoured, but it's probably going to come true, if the tenant's in arrears and you have to evict them, at the moment you can go Section 8, 2 months arrears, and they're evicted. Now, it's going to be on the onus on the landlord to prove that it won't cause unnecessary hardship, such as homelessness, affecting their mental health, or losing a job. Guys, how are we going to prove this in court? It's a minefield. That's a big one. 2 years wait to sell. So if you buy a property, you tenant it, you want to sell it vacant, you want to give a notice because you're selling it, you've got 2 years where you can't do that. Capital gains tax, bombshell, in line with personal tax allowances. So now, if you make 100k on a flip and you're in a higher tax bracket, 40%, guess what, guys? You could be paying 40% capital gains tax. Well, guys, you shouldn't even, if you're paying that, I actually think good for you, because you should have bought that property in a limited company to have taken advice from someone like myself who does every client a limited company, so we don't face this. Limited company tax, around 20%. It goes in as a trading profit at the end of the financial year, not as capital gains tax. So it doesn't go in as capital gains tax, it goes in as corporation tax from trading property, which is usually around 20%. There's going to be a national planning policy framework to get Britain building again. Guys, this ain't going to solve the housing crisis. They need millions of homes. But what it will do is, it will speed up building of property, probably ugly property, since that caveat where you can't build undesirable homes has been removed, in grey belt land. So grey belt land is like outskirts. We're buying in key locations. Okay, so it's only going to increase the value of our properties, because which tenant is going to rent somewhere in grey belt land on the outskirts where they take an hour to get to work, or there's not even any transport links? And finally, guys, there's a clear shift and preference by the government to look after institutional corporate landlords as opposed to your small one-man band landlords. So what does this mean? This means hedge funds, BlackRock, Lloyds Bank are going to be big landlords investing in UK build-to-rent properties, and the money's flowing towards this. Why? Because they know how much they can make. So what do you need to do, guys? You need to operate like a business and not like a landlord by himself as a one-man band. You need systems, policies, parade yourself as a limited company, professional landlord, run it as a business, and you will reap the rewards. Let's get on to the opportunities and how we're going to turn these problems into opportunities and continue to make hay while the sun shines. So, first of all, there's so much opportunity to buy stock from retiring landlords who have made millions from their portfolios, and guess what? They don't mind selling at 30% discount. 70 pence in the pound is what we're paying on average. Why? Because they've cashed in, they want to cash in, they're probably going to pay a lot of tax anyway, they want to get it sold before capital gains tax. Remember, they were buying on their own personal names because the same tax rules didn't apply before 2015-16. So, of course they're selling tenanted properties to us, we're picking them up cheap, we're dealing with tenancies, we're giving them financial incentives to move, or we're putting the rent up slowly, and it's all very much, they win and we win. That's a massive opportunity, and this is where we're getting most of our stock from at the moment, buying tenanted properties. We don't have to do massive refurbs, we can remortgage after a few months, get the money back, use that equity to fund another one. and just build a portfolio like that, and that is what we're doing for clients on a daily basis. Number two, how are we going to deal with hardship tests, 2 years wait to sell, enter no fault evictions? What do we do? Guys, there's riches in niches, and what that means is choose your tenants wisely. We are renting to students, as I said, social housing, corporate lets, Airbnb operators, service accommodation operators. Why? Because if there's a problem with a corporate let, the same rules don't apply, and we can remove the corporation from our property within 24 hours under corporate let rules. There's no hardship test, there's no enter no fault evictions, there's none of that because it's a corporate let. Also, when we're renting to students pay the rent, a lot of them are on visas, they're scared to go to court, they want to come here, work, get sponsorship, get a visa, get a job and make a life. They're not going to be messing about like this. We've never had a problem with a tenant, a student tenant, from abroad especially, with guarantors whose friends are doctors. They just want to crack on. We've never had a problem. So choose your tenants wisely, make sure you're operating in a niche area, leave the problem families, rented families like the old school landlords, leave them to the institutional investors. Let's just focus on a specific niche, and that's what we'll be doing. That's how we'll make millions. Again, social housing, like I've just covered, they're paying more than families. It's guaranteed rent for 3 years, okay, or 5 years if you want it. And if you don't pay, it's a corporate rules. It's not any of this which applies to family lets. We're going to get above average inflation rent increases, increasing property prices. Property prices are still relatively cheap as opposed to other asset prices which have risen massively in terms of the inflationary pressures after COVID. Okay, so Savills predicts 28.8% in the 5-year period between 2024 and 2028 of the North West and Manchester property price increase. 28.8% per property. If you have 5 properties and you've leveraged them all, imagine. And remember guys, the beautiful thing about property, leverage. The mortgage remains the same, but the value of the property increases 28.8% year on year. Wow. The first well-known fact is the enter non-fault evictions. This has been rumoured for some time, and the Conservatives tried to implement it before the last Parliament was dissolved but didn't have time. There's now probably going to be a beefed up Renters Reform Act pushed through Parliament by the new Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycook. So there's going to be an end to non-fault evictions, and what this means for landlords is that you simply can't evict a tenant just because you feel like it, just because they won't pay an extra rent, or just because you want the property back. That is one of the problems, and it's probably the main reason why in the last 2 years since it was rumoured that existing landlords who have made thousands and millions of pounds and who are probably now in their elderly age, 60 plus, are cashing out, and who blames them? But we're new investors and we do have to face this challenge, and I will talk to you about how we're going to do this in the next step. Going on from this is the hardship test, and this is recently, as recent as last week, been rumoured by the housing ministers and insiders in the government that there's going to be a new hardship test similar to what there is in France. And what that basically means is the onus is on the landlord in court, even if there's rent arrears, to prove that evicting the tenant won't cause unnecessary hardship. For example, making them homeless, making them lose their job, or affecting their mental health. This is a very hard test to prove. There's no further details released, but its ultimate aim, one can only guess, is to prevent homelessness and reduce the pressure on councils to rehouse people. So how are we going to deal with this when the tenant is in significant rent arrears, or 1 month pays, 1 month doesn't? We have to go to court to evict under Section 8, and then you'll be faced with, well, we can't evict this tenant because it's going to cause unnecessary hardship or make them homeless. How does that even work? So this is one of the key things that landlords are probably going to be stressed about come September and October, when these changes are starting to make draft proposals to pass through the Act through Parliament. Then there's a 2 years wait to sell, and this again has been rumoured. So starting a new tenancy, you buy a property, you cannot just decide in a year to sell the property vacant. So, people will say, okay, you'll be able to sell a property because you want to put your family in it, or you want to basically make it vacant, give the tenants notice and sell the property, there'll actually be a halt on that for the first 2 years of the tenancy. The likelihood is you won't be able to do that. Okay, so you could probably sell it tenanted, okay, which a lot of landlords do now, but obviously the price is going to be lower, as much as 30% lower, so that'll be an interesting one. But again, it's putting landlords off. Then a rumoured CGT, capital gains tax, increase in line with personal tax allowance. So if you're on a higher tax banding, you'll likely face an increased capital gains tax for selling your properties, guys. So if you're a landlord and you bought under your personal name, and you think, oh, do you know what, I'm going to sell now because of all of this, well, guess what? They're trying to make it difficult for you to even sell by saying, okay, you're going to pay 40% CGT now because you're in that personal tax branding for income tax. So they're trying to make it difficult for landlords, but at the same time making it difficult for you to exit the market. And why is that? Because the more landlords who exit the market, the higher rental prices go, because there's less rental stock. So they're trying to caveat that by going, okay, you want to sell because you don't want to be a landlord anymore, we'll effectively force you to be a landlord because the capital gains tax is higher. And this is why you should have been buying in a limited company. All my clients now buy in a limited company. Capital gains tax from trading properties or selling properties is actually company's tax, which is 20 to 25%. Okay, so that shouldn't even be a problem, but if it is, if you're an old school landlord, what can you do? There's a national planning policy framework which is going to make it easier to build. Quite possibly the building in new grey land. So it's going to be easier to build in building sites, and quite possibly a percentage of that is going to have to be retained for social housing. So we're going to expect to see a lot more developments which can't be blocked because of the countryside and don't have to be aesthetically pleasing. Now, obviously, there's only certain areas which you can build in this grey land. It's not where we're buying stock, which is city centre areas, because there's physically nowhere to build. So what that actually means is that our stock in key locations, which I've always advocated by location first, property second, is only going to get more desirable because they're not building stock around there. They're going to make new towns far out, and it's not ever going to be as desirable as central Manchester, central Liverpool, for example. Same thing will happen in London. And finally, there's an other shift to institutional corporate landlords, and we're already seeing this. We're already seeing landlords such as Lloyds Bank aiming to have 50 or 500,000 homes. Okay, so they're going to be corporate institutional investors. We're seeing hedge funds from the US plough money in, and this is only a good thing, guys, because this means follow the money. And if they're putting money, if the big banks and the institutional investors who spent millions on research think it's a good investment, why wouldn't you? So, with that said, guys, how can we turn this tide against landlords, this tide against, which seems to be, let's go against landlords, into something positive for us to make money? The first thing I point you to is a quote by Warren Buffett, which is, be greedy when they're fearful. And you'll see in September, October, especially when this act comes out, how many landlords are going to be fearful, how many are going to rush to panic sell and get reduced prices. And we're picking up their stock already. It's been happening for the last year, because obviously this has been rumoured for a long time. So you have to follow where the money is. The big money is going into this, institutional landlords. So you put your money there and you're likely to ride that wave. So here's the advantages. 6 ways we can turn these problems into opportunities. The first one, okay, so there's an enter no-fault evictions. So we're buying stock from existing older landlords, retiring landlords, at minimum 80 pence in the pound. So that's 20% discount, 70 pence in the pound, 30% discount. Tenanted properties, inherited good paying tenants where we can slowly put the rent up, or we can manage them out of the property onto alternative properties, sometimes giving them financial incentives. But the main thing is we're getting the properties at a very, very good discount where we can remortgage, use that discount to fund our next property and build a portfolio in that way. Second of all, okay, so you're going to have problems with rent controls have been scrapped, and there's no apparently there's no likelihood of that, but there could be rent caps, and there could be obviously 2 years wait to sell and an end to NOFA evictions and hardship tests. How do we get around this? If you're a landlord, you need tenants, don't you? So how do you get around this? I always said there's riches in niches. So what that means is We've always rented to professional working students, social housing, HMOs, where you don't actually have tenants who want to stay in a property for 10 years. They're always moving on. Our tenants are 18 months, 6 months, 12 months. International foreign students, they don't want to be in court fighting your, squatting in your property. They're there to build a life, and then they move on and the next person comes. So the old model of renting to families for 10 years on low rent is dead, and you never used to make money like that. We make very, very good rental income, and we can live off that rental income, and it funds holidays, nice lifestyles such as this, and that comes through high yielding HMOs, £700 a room. Okay, and even if we did have a problem with the tenant not paying, you still get the other 3 or 4 or 5 rooms. So that's one of the main things of riches in niches. You don't rent to your standard family lets anymore. Let the big corporation landlords, let them deal with that. We'll concentrate on the riches in niches. We'll concentrate on social housing contracts, Airbnbs, corporate lets, and student professionals tenants who are main market. And any property we buy, we'll try and do HMOs on it. There's going to be above inflation rent increases, and guess why? Because the stocks, people are leaving the market. Of course, it's common sense. Anything you do against landlords, like they did in Ireland, like they did in Scotland, only serves as a populist vote, but also serves to harm the actual good majority of tenants who are working and paying the rent. What's going to happen? The rent's going to go up because there's less landlords in the market. Who's going to take all this risk when they're 50, 60 years old and they've got millions? You're just going to sell it. Do you know what I mean? So, especially with the old landlords who used the old model of renting to working families, of course it's selling up. So the rent's only going to go up. But guess what, guys? The rent doesn't just go up for working families, it goes up for everyone because it's market rent. So it's going to go up for our HMO rooms as well. Even though we don't have the problems of those tenants, we still get the benefit of rent increases because it's market rent. So that's a good way of combating this problem. You're going to see an increase in property prices, especially as I talked about in the key areas, the key strategic areas, the city centre areas, the good locations, not in the grey belt land they're building, which is far out, but wherever I bought, where there's been new developments, always risen the prices. A rising tide lifts all ships. And bear in mind the new build prices are not going to be cheap because the developers always put a premium on them. Suddenly your bigger semi-detached or terrace house, which is actually bigger than the new build and built better and probably have more outside space, is worth more. Common sense again, and this is proven through statistics. And the last thing is, guys, the shift to institutional corporate landlords. Okay, so they're ploughing money in from the US hedge funds, Lloyds Bank, all of that. Why? Property's still relatively cheap. Picking up properties for 150k, 130k. The price of an average new car like Ford Mondeo was like 40k. So if you're buying properties for 130, 150k, it's still cheap. And guess what? It hasn't risen as much as other prices have in this inflationary market in the last few years. So relatively speaking, it's got a long way to go, guys. It's nowhere near the top, nowhere near. It's actually just coming out of the bottom. So it's an actual bargain to buy properties for 130 grand in central location where you can get up to 2k a month rent. That's what I would say to that. Large institutional investors become landlords and buying up stock. This is also positive for smaller landlords. Yes, we will have to operate more as a business, which I've always advocated. Set up as a limited company and run your property investment as a business to reap the best rewards as a successful business does. But big money only goes into areas where they see large returns. So this is a very positive side for our asset prices and our rental returns. So remember, guys, where there is money flowing, follow that money. If it's from institutional money, especially hedge funds never lose. BlackRock, Lloyds Bank, they never lose, guys. So if they're investing in UK property, you will never lose either. Do you think they're going to let their prices go down? Not a chance. The other thing I'd like to say, you can expect a large above increase inflation in rent. Every time pressure is put on landlords, they exit. Less supply, less homes to rent equals higher prices and more ability for us as landlords to choose the most desirable tenants. Tenants who want to pay 6 months in advance. Tenants who are students with guarantors or professionals from abroad who are not going to mess us about. And they're not going to squat in our properties for years and years. They're here to do a course and go and become a doctor, etc. Manchester rents are 20% more expensive than last year. Well, a £1,000 house I used to rent is now 1,200. Now guys, times that by 37 properties I own. And they're just the properties that are single let, not even HMOs where we get it per room, but that's £7,400 increase in our bottom line profit just from rental income, from a 20% increase in rent prices. Why? Because there's less landlords in the market. This is only going to get worse, guys, in terms of for tenants, but for us, with less landlords in the market, you know, we control the prices more and we can actually get more rents. Regardless of whether there's rent caps, rent controls, you can only put rent up a certain amount in the tenancy. It's irrelevant to us. Our tenancy are 6 months, 12 months, one. So every time we start a new tenancy, we can reset the market rent, which is going up all the time. Guys, there's barriers to entry now. Think about it. Let's take an analogy from a different industry, oil and petroleum, okay? There's probably 2 or 3 big companies who supply the petrol stations. Does anyone mess about with them? Does anyone control the prices, or is it always going up? There's the answer. Okay, it's the same with reducing the amount of landlords in the UK means that the existing landlords who are buying up, or the new landlords buying up rental stock, have more control, have more power and benefit from higher price rises if they run it like a corporate business to match the institutional investors. Gone are the days with the old landlords, and that's why they're retiring, who can just force bang on the door of a family house and say, where's my rent? It's not going to happen, guys. You can't even keep them out anymore. This is why we have to choose our tenants especially carefully. This is why all our clients, we introduce them to social housing contracts where it's guaranteed for 3 years. Corporate lets do not apply the same rules. You can get rid of corporate company lets straight away if they don't pay the rent. Student lets, they always pay. They're here on visas. Of course not going to go to court. Okay, they don't want to do it. Would you go to court if you were studying in the US? No, you wouldn't. Okay, so we've never had a problem with students. Professionals are going to be doctors. They want to come here, keep their head down, do the work, hopefully get residency and crack on in life. So it's a good thing really that there's less landlords. Our pockets are only going to get fatter. Guys, I'm going to end it. With that all being said, the future's bright for landlords. If you're doing it the right way, if you take risk only comes from not knowing what you're doing. Get educated. Do it properly. Structure your business from day one. I've got so many clients who've come to me now after investing for 5 or 6 years doing it the wrong way, and it's better to do it the right way. It will have already been rich by now. Here. Opportunities come infrequently in business and in life. When it rains gold, put out the bucket, not the thimble. It will change your life. Trust me, I did this 10 years ago and I'm doing it again today. Get in the comments for your free property investment guide. Change your life. Buy UK property.